December 17, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Oberschütze Friedrich Weber pressed his back against the frozen trunk of a pine tree, his breath forming small clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. His carabiner, 98K, felt heavy in his gloved hands, though he'd carried it for 3 years across half of Europe. The bolt handle, turned down and cold to the touch, even through wool, represented everything he'd been taught about German infantry doctrine: precision, discipline, economy of fire. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. 45 feet away, through the skeletal branches and morning mist, American soldiers moved through the forest. Weber had been told these Americans were hasty reinforcements. Inexperienced units rushed to plug the gap in Allied lines during Operation Watch on Rhine. His officers assured him that German tactical superiority and individual soldier skill would compensate for any equipment disparity. What happened in the next 8 seconds would prove those assurances catastrophically inadequate. The mathematics of what was about to occur were simple and brutal. At 45 feet, moving at an average infantry advance speed of approximately 3 feet per second, those American soldiers would need roughly 15 seconds to close the distance for an assault. In that span, Weber could fire perhaps 3, maybe 4 rounds from his bolt-action rifle if he worked the action with practiced efficiency. Load 1 round, fire, pull back the bolt handle, eject the spent casing, push forward, load the next round, aim, fire again. The Americans opened fire. The sound shattered Weber's calculations entirely. Not the familiar crack-pause crack of bolt-action rifles, but a continuous rolling thunder of semi-automatic fire. 8 rounds from each rifle, fired as quickly as triggers could be pulled, no pause to. Work bolts. No interruption in the stream of aimed fire ripping through the winter forest. By the time Weber had fired his second shot and worked his bolt for the third, the American soldier opposite him had already emptied his entire 8-round clip and was reaching for another. This wasn't just technological disparity. It was tactical obsolescence made manifest in gunpowder and lead. The M1 Garands rifle, standard issue for every American infantryman by December 1944, represented a revolution in small arms warfare that German military planners had failed to fully appreciate. While German intelligence reports acknowledged the rifle's existence, they fundamentally miscalculated its impact on combat effectiveness at close quarters. The story of German confidence in close-range combat began not with technological assessment, but with military tradition stretching back to the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871. Prussian infantry doctrine had emphasized disciplined volley fire and individual marksmanship since the days of breech-loading needle guns. This philosophy evolved through the Great War and into the Wehrmacht's tactical framework, always centered on the principle that well-trained soldiers with reliable weapons would prevail through superior skill and fire discipline. The carabiner, 98K, adopted on June 21, 1935, embodied this philosophy perfectly. Accurate out to 550 yards with iron sights, mechanically reliable in mud, snow, and sand. Simple enough for conscripts to maintain in field conditions, the Kar 98K represented the apex of bolt-action rifle development. It fired the powerful 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser cartridge capable of penetrating substantial cover and body armor. In trained hands, operating from prepared defensive positions, the Kar 98K had conquered Poland, France, the Low Countries, the Balkans, and driven deep into Soviet territory. German military doctrine in 1944 still emphasized aimed fire from advantageous positions. Infantry training manuals stressed the importance of each cartridge being carefully placed. The standard expected of a trained German soldier was approximately 15 aimed rounds per minute from his Kar 98K. This figure came from extensive testing at infantry schools and represented what was achievable under field conditions, accounting for the time required to work the bolt between shots, reacquire the target through iron sights, and maintain fire discipline. 15 rounds per minute seemed adequate when compared against international standards. The British Lee Enfield, with its 10-round magazine and smooth bolt action, could achieve perhaps 18 rounds per minute in skilled hands. The Soviet Mosin Nagant, averaged 12 rounds per minute. The French MAS-36, Italian Carcano, and even the American M1903 Springfield were all bolt-action designs with similar practical rates of fire. German military theorists concluded that any firepower disadvantage in individual weapons would be compensated by superior tactics, unit cohesion, and the concentrated firepower of MG-34 and MG-42 machine guns. This analysis contained a critical flaw. It treated the M1 Garand as merely a faster bolt-action rifle, rather than recognizing it as a weapon that fundamentally transformed infantry combat mathematics. When American forces had first entered major combat operations in North Africa during Operation Torch in November 1942, German intelligence prepared detailed assessments of American equipment. These reports painted a picture of industrial abundance but questionable military effectiveness. American infantry, the assessments claimed, relied too heavily on firepower and too little on tactical sophistication. The M1 Garand appeared in these intelligence evaluations as a semi-automatic rifle of interest, but not particular concern. German analysts noted its 8-round capacity and self-loading mechanism, but focused primarily on what they perceived as drawbacks. The rifle weighed approximately 9.5 pounds compared to the Kar-98K's 8.2 pounds. It was more complex mechanically, with more parts that could potentially malfunction. The en-bloc clip system seemed unnecessarily complicated compared to the simple 5-round stripper clips used by German rifles. Most critically, German analysts concluded that while the M1 offered higher volume of fire, it necessarily sacrificed the accuracy and reliability inherent in simpler bolt-action mechanisms. This assessment reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of American military philosophy. Where German doctrine emphasized individual precision, American doctrine increasingly emphasized volume of effective fire. A soldier who could put 8 rounds on target in the time his opponent fired 3 didn't need to be twice as accurate to achieve superior results. By December 1944, the M1 Garand had equipped virtually every American rifleman in the European theater. From D-Day on June 6, 1944, through the liberation of France and the push toward German borders, American infantry had demonstrated the rifle's combat effectiveness repeatedly. Yet German tactical doctrine had failed to adapt to this new reality. Training manuals still described American infantry as relying on material superiority rather than tactical skill. German soldiers were taught that disciplined fire from prepared positions would suppress American advances. The reality German soldiers discovered in close-range forest fighting was far different. At 45 feet, the tactical situation that had favored disciplined bolt-action fire in earlier wars became a mathematical death trap. Consider the actual timeline of an engagement at this range. A German soldier, season date. American soldier, 45 feet distant. Human reaction time, even for trained soldiers in combat conditions, averages approximately 0.3 to 0.5 seconds for visual stimulus recognition and response initiation. Add another 0.2 to 0.4 seconds to acquire a sight picture and begin trigger press. So roughly 0.7 seconds from visual contact to first shot. The German soldier fires. The Kar-98K's 7.92mm round leaves the barrel at approximately 2,600 feet per second. At 45 feet, time of flight is effectively instantaneous, less than 0.02 seconds, but after that first shot, the German soldier must work the bolt, raise the bolt handle, pull back, ejecting the spent cartridge, push forward, stripping a new round from the internal magazine, lower the bolt handle, locking the action, reacquire the target through iron sights, fire again. Detailed timing studies conducted with experienced shooters using Kar-98K rifles demonstrated this bolt operation cycle takes approximately 2 to 2.5 seconds for trained soldiers under range. Conditions. In combat, with adrenaline affecting fine motor control, under stress, potentially from awkward positions, if you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The time extends to 3 to 4 seconds between shots. So, in the first 5 seconds of an engagement, a German soldier might fire twice. At 45 feet, assuming both soldiers opened fire simultaneously. The German has fired 2 rounds, worked his bolt twice, and is acquiring his target for a third shot. The American soldier with his M1 Garand has fired 8 rounds. The M1 Garand operated on a gas-operated, rotating bolt system. When a round fired, propellant gases were diverted through a port in the barrel into a gas cylinder underneath. These gases drove a piston that cycled the action, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round from the 8-round en-bloc clip. The entire cycle occurred, in a fraction of a second, faster than the human eye could clearly perceive. The rifle's action remained closed between shots, maintaining perfect alignment between barrel and sights. The shooter's hand never left the pistol grip. His sight picture remained virtually undisturbed. Accuracy did not degrade despite rapid fire. Testing conducted at Springfield Armory demonstrated M1 Garands, maintaining 4-minute of angle groups, meaning 4 inches of spread at 100 yards, even during rapid fire. Many rifles performed significantly better. Practical rate of fire for the M1 Garand under combat conditions averaged 40 to 50 rounds per minute for trained soldiers. This wasn't theoretical. It represented actual sustained fire rates, including reloading. 8 rounds in the clip, ejected automatically when the last round fired. New clip inserted, requiring approximately 2 to 3 seconds for a trained soldier. 40 rounds per minute meant firing and reloading 5 full clips per minute. At 45 feet, in that first critical 15 seconds as the range closed, an American soldier could fire 1 full clip, reload, and fire 6 rounds from a second clip. 14 aimed shots compared to perhaps 3 or 4 from a German soldier. The mathematics became even more overwhelming when calculated at squad level. A German infantry squad in 1944 typically consisted of 9 to 10 men, including an MG-42 machine gun team. 7 to 8 riflemen carried Kar 98K rifles. In a 15-second engagement at 45 feet, those 7 riflemen might collectively fire 21 to 28 rounds, assuming no one was suppressed or forced to take cover. An American infantry squad consisted of 12 men, 1 Browning automatic rifle gunner, 1 assistant, and 10 men with M1 Garands. In the same 2 seconds, those 10 riflemen could collectively fire 80 to 100 aimed rounds. The firepower disparity was so extreme that American rifle squads possessed greater small arms firepower than German rifle squads, even without considering the BAR or German machine gun. German soldiers first encountered this firepower reality not in the Ardennes, but throughout the campaigns in France following D-Day. The hedgerow country of Normandy, with its ancient dirt walls topped by dense vegetation, created natural compartmentalization that frequently forced close-range engagements. German defenders, dug into advantageous positions behind hedgerows, discovered that American infantry could deliver such overwhelming volumes of fire that even well-prepared defensive positions became untenable. After-action reports from German units in Normandy consistently mentioned the intensity of American small arms fire. Officers described American infantry tactics as crude but effective, relying on massive firepower to suppress defenders, while other elements maneuvered for advantage. What German officers interpreted as tactical crudeness was actually American infantry doctrine, leveraging technological superiority. Why execute complex flanking maneuvers when your squad could simply deliver 3 times the firepower of the enemy position? The psychological impact on German soldiers proved as significant as the tactical disadvantage. German military culture had emphasized Germanic technical and tactical superiority since the wars of unification in the 1860s and 80s. Propaganda throughout the Third Reich reinforced notions of German military excellence. Individual German soldiers, properly trained and equipped, were supposed to be worth multiple enemy soldiers. This wasn't merely propaganda but reflected genuine belief rooted in military tradition and actual combat performance in the early war years. When that fundamental assumption crumbled under American rifle fire, the psychological effect rippled through German units. A German soldier who had trained extensively with his Kar 98K, who could place rounds accurately at 300 yards, who took pride in his marksmanship and discipline, found himself unable to win firefights against American infantrymen who simply pulled triggers faster. The myth of superiority couldn't survive contact with mathematical reality. The Ardennes offensive, launched December 16, 1944, represented Germany's last major offensive operation in the West. The initial attack achieved tactical surprise, pushing through thinly held American lines. In the forests and villages of Belgium, however, German infantry repeatedly encountered American units that should have been overwhelmed by veteran German soldiers. Instead, the firepower differential turned numerous small unit actions into German defeats. Consider a typical encounter. German infantry, advancing through forest terrain, make contact with American positions at ranges of 30 to 75 feet. Tree cover limits visibility and fields of fire. German doctrine called for advancing under covering fire from machine guns and mortars, with rifle squads moving by bounds from cover to cover. When American infantry returned fire, the sheer volume forced German soldiers to ground. Attempting to return aimed fire meant exposing oneself to 3 times as many incoming rounds. The tactical solution American infantry developed was brutally effective. Fix the enemy with rifle fire. Deliver such overwhelming volume that German soldiers couldn't effectively return fire, then maneuver for advantage or call in indirect fire support. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't the tactical sophistication German military theorists prized, but it worked because the M1 Garand gave American infantry the firepower to make it work. German attempts to compensate for this firepower disadvantage revealed the depth of the problem. In theory, superior tactics and positioning should overcome raw firepower. German infantry training emphasized using terrain effectively, establishing overlapping fields of fire, and coordinating infantry machine gun teams. These tactics had proven successful against Soviet infantry armed with bolt-action Mosin Nagant rifles and even against submachine gun-armed assault troops, where the range exceeded 100 yards. Against American infantry at close quarters, these tactics proved insufficient. The fundamental problem was suppression. In infantry combat, suppression means delivering enough fire that enemy soldiers cannot effectively return fire without exposing themselves to unacceptable risk. A soldier being shot at by 3 enemy riflemen will instinctively take cover, limiting his ability to return fire. A soldier being shot at by 10 enemy riflemen delivering 40 to 50 rounds per minute collectively faces nearly continuous incoming fire that makes any exposure extremely dangerous. German machine gun teams provided concentrated firepower that could suppress American positions effectively. The MG-42, firing at rates up to 1,200 rounds per minute, could force entire squads to cover. But machine guns had limitations. They required ammunition, which was heavy and finite. They required set-up time and preferred stable firing positions. They attracted immediate counterfire from American weapons, including 60mm mortars, machine guns, and increasingly, as the war progressed, direct fire from Sherman tank cannons. German rifle squads needed their riflemen to contribute effective fire to support machine gun positions and protect flanks. When those riflemen found themselves outmatched 3-1 in firepower by their American counterparts, the entire tactical structure began failing. American infantry could suppress German rifle positions with their organic weapons, then maneuver against machine gun positions that became isolated once their supporting riflemen were pinned down. Specific examples from the Ardennes fighting illustrated this dynamic. On December 22, 1944, near the village of Mannheim, elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich engaged American units from the 82nd Airborne Division. The fighting occurred largely in forested terrain, with engagement ranges of 50 to 150 feet. German after-action reports described American infantry as demonstrating minimal tactical sophistication, but overwhelming firepower at close range. One German squad leader, Unterscharführer Hans Becker, described an engagement where his 9-man squad attempted to advance through forest toward American positions. At approximately 70 feet, American infantry opened fire. Becker estimated facing perhaps 8 to 10 American soldiers. In the first 10 seconds, his squad came under such intense fire that 3 men were hit, and the remainder went to ground behind whatever cover they could find. Becker attempted to organize return fire, but every time his men rose to shoot, they faced immediate incoming rounds. The engagement lasted approximately 5 minutes. Becker's squad fired perhaps 80 rounds collectively. The Americans, by his estimate, fired several hundred rounds. When American infantry began flanking movements, Becker ordered withdrawal. His squad suffered 4 casualties, 3 wounded and 1 killed. They claimed no American casualties, though in the chaos it was impossible to know with certainty. Becker's report concluded that American rifle fire was so intense it prevented effective German tactical response. This pattern repeated across hundreds of small unit actions during the Ardennes campaign. German infantry, even veteran SS units with extensive combat experience, found close-range engagements with American infantry to be unexpectedly costly. The tactical advantages that German training and experience should have provided were negated by sheer firepower. Disparity. It wasn't that German soldiers fought poorly, or that American soldiers fought brilliantly. It was that American soldiers had a tool that multiplied their individual effectiveness. The technical specifications of both rifles revealed why this disparity existed. The Kar-98K was a magnificent bolt-action rifle by any measure. Its Mauser action, with dual locking lugs and a controlled round feeding system, was mechanically excellent. The rifle could function reliably in extreme conditions, from Arctic cold to desert heat. Its 7.92mm cartridge delivered substantial energy at extended ranges. Accuracy was exceptional, with many rifles capable of 2 to 3 minute of angle groups. But the Kar-98K was fundamentally a 1930s implementation of an 1890s design concept. Paul Mauser's original Gewehr 98, introduced in 1898, established the basic action design. The Kar-98K shortened the barrel and improved the stock design, but retained the fundamental bolt-action mechanism that required manual cycling between shots. This wasn't a flaw. It was simply the state of rifle technology when the design was finalized in 1934 and adopted in 1935. The M1 Garand represented a different design philosophy entirely. John Cantius Garand, a Canadian-born engineer working at Springfield Armory, began developing semi-automatic rifle concepts in the early 1920s. The United States Army had recognized after World War I that semi-automatic rifles offered significant tactical advantages if they could be made reliable enough for military service. Garand spent 15 years refining his design, solving problems related to gas systems, ammunition feeding, and mechanical reliability. The rifle adopted on January 9, 1936, fired the 30-06 Springfield cartridge from an 8-round en-bloc clip. The gas operated. Action used expanding gases from each fired round to cycle the mechanism. A piston, driven by gas pressure, moved rearward, rotating and unlocking the bolt, extracting and ejecting the spent cartridge, then moving forward under spring pressure to strip a new round from the clip and chamber it. The entire cycle occurred faster than the shooter could pull the trigger again. Critical to the M1's success was reliability. Early semi-automatic rifles, including some of Garand's prototypes, suffered from complexity that made them prone to malfunction. The final M1 design achieved remarkable reliability through careful engineering. The gas system was simple with few parts. The operating rod and bolt were robust. The action tolerated dirt, moisture, and temperature extremes. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground subjected M1 rifles to extreme abuse, firing thousands of rounds without cleaning, exposing rifles to mud, sand, and water, and operating in sub-zero and high-heat conditions. The rifles continued functioning. This reliability meant the M1's higher rate of fire wasn't theoretical. Under actual field conditions, American soldiers could depend on their rifles to fire all 8 rounds without malfunction, reload in seconds, and continue firing. German soldiers similarly depended on their Kar-98Ks for reliability. The difference was that reliable bolt-action operation still meant manually cycling the action between shots, while reliable semi-automatic operation meant continuous fire as fast as the trigger could be pulled. The ammunition both rifles fired also revealed design philosophy differences. The German 7.92 by 57mm Mauser cartridge, introduced in 1888 and refined over subsequent decades, was powerful and effective. The standard Wehrmacht infantry load, designated S, Patron, with a boat-tailed bullet, delivered a 198-grain projectile at approximately 2,450 feet per second from a Kar 98K's barrel. This provided excellent accuracy and retained energy at extended ranges. The American .30-06 Springfield cartridge, adopted in 1906 as the name implied, fired a 150-grain bullet at approximately 2,800 feet per second from an M1 Garand. The higher velocity and lighter bullet meant flatter trajectory at typical combat ranges. Recoil was moderate, approximately 16 to 17 foot-pounds compared to the Kar 98K's 18 to 20 foot-pounds. This modest recoil advantage became significant in rapid fire, where the M1's semi-automatic action and manageable recoil allowed quick recovery between shots. Both cartridges were fully capable of killing at any range infantry combat occurred. The tactical difference wasn't terminal ballistics but volume of fire. A German soldier with 5 rounds in his Kar 98K's magazine and perhaps 40 additional rounds in pouches on his belt carried enough ammunition for perhaps 3 to 4 minutes of sustained combat firing at doctrinal rates. An American soldier with 48 rounds in 6 en-bloc clips carried enough ammunition for approximately 90 seconds of sustained rapid fire, but that 90 seconds represented 96 trigger pulls. Ammunition supply became a factor in extended engagements. American infantry logistics provided abundant ammunition resupply. Standard load plans ensured rifle ammunition remained available even during fluid operations. German logistics, stressed by Allied air interdiction and strategic material shortages, sometimes struggled to maintain ammunition flow to forward units. A weapon system that consumed ammunition faster required more reliable logistics. The human cost of this firepower imbalance appeared starkly in casualty statistics. While many factors affected casualty rates, including artillery, air power, armor support, and tactical situation, studies of small unit actions consistently demonstrated patterns. When American and German infantry units of comparable size engaged at close quarters, American units typically inflicted higher casualties while suffering proportionally fewer losses. Post-war analysis by American military historians examined hundreds of company and platoon-level actions from Normandy through the end of the war. The data, while imperfect due to the chaos of combat record-keeping, suggested American rifle squads inflicted approximately 30 to 50% more casualties per engagement than German rifle squads of equivalent size. The differential was most pronounced in close-range encounters under 200 yards, precisely where the M1 Garands rate of fire advantage mattered most. Individual German soldiers described the experience of facing M1 armed Americans in interviews conducted after the war. A common theme was the shock of discovering their carefully aimed shots were answered by what seemed like overwhelming return fire. German infantry doctrine taught fire discipline, making each shot count, coordinating fire with squad mates. This worked when opponents operated under similar constraints. Against American infantry who could fire 8 rounds in the time it took to fire 3, German fire discipline became a liability rather than an asset. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Schneider, captured near Bastogne on December 27, 1944, told interrogators that fighting American infantry felt different from fighting Soviet or British troops. Soviet infantry, even when equipped with submachine guns, fired in less organized patterns and could be defeated through disciplined return fire and tactical maneuver. American infantry fired differently, delivering sustained, aimed fire that seemed continuous. Schneider said his squad couldn't gain fire superiority, even when holding advantageous positions. The psychological weight of this realization cannot be understated. German military culture valued technical excellence and tactical proficiency. Individual soldiers took pride in their weapon handling skills and marksmanship. Being consistently outfought by opponents who weren't necessarily better trained or more experienced, but simply had better weapons, was devastating to unit morale. It suggested that German tactical and technical superiority, drilled into soldiers through training and propaganda, was illusory. This morale impact was compounded by other factors late in the war. By December 1944, German soldiers understood their strategic situation was deteriorating. Allied armies pressed from west and east. German cities suffered under aerial bombardment. Material shortages affected everything from food to ammunition to winter clothing. Against this background of declining fortunes, discovering that even at the individual level, in small unit combat where personal skill should matter most, German soldiers were outmatched by American equipment, added another psychological burden. American military leadership recognized the M1 Garands value explicitly. General George Smith Patton Jr., commander of 3rd Army during the European campaign, wrote to Major General Levin Hicks Campbell Jr., Chief of Ordnance, on January 26, 1945. Patton's letter was brief and direct. "In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised." This wasn't casual praise. Patton understood infantry combat thoroughly and recognized the M1 had fundamentally changed the equation. Other senior American commanders shared this assessment. General Dwight David Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, mentioned the M1 Garand in post-war writings as one of the key weapons that gave Allied infantry advantages over German forces. The rifle appeared frequently in after-action reports and lessons learned documents as a critical factor in successful infantry operations. Unlike many weapons systems that looked impressive on paper but disappointed in combat, the M1 Garand exceeded expectations. Production numbers demonstrated American commitment to the weapon. From 1937, when production began, through 1945, when World War II ended, American industry manufactured approximately 4,408,200 M1 Garand rifles. Springfield Armory in Massachusetts produced 3,526,922 rifles. Winchester, Repeating Arms Company in Connecticut, manufactured 513,880. Harrington and Richardson Arms Company, International Harvester Company, and other contractors produced smaller quantities. This production achievement meant that by June 6, 1944, D-Day, virtually every American rifleman in infantry divisions carried an M1 Garand. This represented unprecedented industrial and logistical accomplishment, equipping millions of soldiers with semi-automatic rifles, training them in the weapon's use, and maintaining ammunition supply chains to feed those rifles required enormous resources. The United States committed those resources because military leadership understood the tactical value. Germany, meanwhile, attempted semi-automatic rifle development but never achieved comparable success. The Gewehr 41, introduced in 1941, used a complex gas trap system similar to early M1 prototypes. The rifle proved unreliable in field conditions and was too complicated for mass production. The improved Gewehr 43, adopted in 1943, addressed some reliability issues and saw limited production. Approximately 400,000 Gewehr 43 rifles were manufactured through 1945. These rifles were issued primarily to specialized troops, including designated marksmen and some assault units. The majority of German infantry never received semi-automatic rifles. This wasn't due to lack of recognition of their value. German military planners understood semi-automatic rifles offered advantages. The problem was industrial capacity. German war production prioritized tanks, aircraft, artillery, and ammunition. Producing enough Kar 98K rifles to equip expanding armies strained capacity. Switching to more complex semi-automatic rifle production wasn't feasible given resource and industrial constraints. The contrast illustrated broader differences between American and German approaches to warfare. American military doctrine emphasized providing soldiers with superior equipment, accepting the industrial and logistical costs involved. German doctrine emphasized tactical excellence and accepted equipment limitations as constraints to be overcome through skill. Both approaches had validity, but the American approach proved more effective when industrial capacity permitted it. By January 1945, as the Ardennes offensive collapsed and German forces retreated, the firepower differential between American and German infantry had become an accepted reality. German tactical manuals began emphasizing the importance of avoiding close-range engagements with American infantry where possible, instead attempting to engage at ranges beyond 300 yards, where individual marksmanship with accurate bolt-action rifles might offset American firepower advantages. This represented a significant doctrinal shift forced by battlefield reality. The final months of the war in Europe saw German infantry increasingly outgunned at every level. American firepower superiority extended beyond rifles to include artillery, air support, armor, and logistics. But at the most fundamental level, the individual infantryman level, the M1 Garand represented a clear and measurable advantage that German soldiers could neither match nor effectively counter. The mathematics remained constant. In the time required to fire 3 carefully aimed shots from a Kar 98K, an American soldier with an M1 Garand could fire 8. At 45 feet, that mathematical reality became tactical dominance. German infantry, who had been taught they were superior, discovered their excellence with inferior weapons produced inferior results. American infantry, many of them drafted civilians with minimal training, wielded a weapon that multiplied their effectiveness and compensated for their relative inexperience. The M1 Garand didn't win the war alone. Victory required combined arms, air superiority, industrial might, and the courage of millions. But at the squad level, where individual soldiers fought and died, the M1 Garand provided clear and measurable advantage. The legacy of the M1 Garand extended far beyond World War II. The rifle remained standard issue for American forces through the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. It wasn't officially replaced until the M14 was adopted on March 26, 1958, with first deliveries beginning July 1959. Even then, M1 Garands remained in service with Reserve and National Guard units into the 1970s. The rifle saw combat across 3 major conflicts spanning nearly 30 years. More importantly, the M1 Garand established the principle that infantry benefits substantially from self-loading rifles. Every modern military rifle, from the Soviet AK-47 to the American M16 to current-generation assault rifles, owes conceptual debt to the M1 Garand. It proved that semi-automatic operation wasn't merely feasible for military rifles, but essential. The days of massed infantry armed with bolt-action rifles ended decisively in World War II, and the M1 Garand played the leading role in that transformation. For German infantry, who faced M1-equipped Americans in combat, the rifle represented an unpleasant lesson about the relationship between technology and tactical outcomes. German soldiers were brave, well-trained, and equipped with reliable weapons. But reliability and accuracy weren't enough when opponents could fire 3 times as many rounds in the same period. Superior equipment in skilled hands makes profound difference in battle outcomes. This lesson, learned through bitter experience in forests and villages across Europe, challenged every assumption German military culture held about the primacy of tactical skill over material advantage. The story of German infantry having 45 feet before M1 Garands fired 8 rounds while they worked, their bolts wasn't merely about technology. It was about military institutions adapting, or failing to adapt, to changing realities. The United States Army recognized the value of semi-automatic rifles in the 1920s and committed 15 years and substantial resources to developing a reliable design. German military institutions, bound by tradition and constrained by industrial capacity, continued fielding bolt-action rifles because that's what they could produce in sufficient quantities. Neither decision was obviously correct at the time. Semi-automatic rifles required more industrial capacity, more complex manufacturing, more maintenance, and more ammunition logistics. Germany's resource constraints made these costs particularly heavy, but the battlefield results demonstrated that these costs, however substantial, were worth paying. The tactical advantage of 3-to-1 firepower superiority outweighed the industrial and logistical challenges. In final analysis, the M1 Garand succeeded because it delivered on its core promise. It gave individual American infantrymen the ability to deliver overwhelming firepower quickly and accurately. It worked reliably in terrible conditions. It was simple enough that drafted civilians could learn to use it effectively with modest training, and it was produced in sufficient quantities that every rifleman could carry one. These aren't glamorous achievements, but they represent exactly what military equipment should accomplish, making soldiers more effective at their jobs while remaining reliable and maintainable under field conditions. The 45 feet that separated German and American infantry in countless engagements across Europe represented more than physical distance. It represented the gap between 19th century rifle technology refined to perfection and 20th century rifle technology that redefined what infantry weapons could achieve. That gap, measured in feet, translated to gaps in casualties, in tactical outcomes, in morale, and ultimately in strategic results. German infantry were excellent soldiers fighting with excellent bolt-action rifles. American infantry were adequate soldiers fighting with revolutionary semi-automatic rifles. In close-quarters combat, the revolution won decisively. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.